Chain is one of the most problematic combo pieces in the EDH format. Although a staple in cEDH, a lot of folks have a problem with this card just because of how easy it is to enable. In its colors, there are 3 big enablers that have come over time that have really changed the playability of a card like this and really defined the archetype of one big commander that came with one of the original precons as well. And we're going to go over that in the video today. I want to talk about the problems I have with Food Chain, how easy it is to enable, and honestly, not that it's necessarily ban-worthy or a problem in the EDH format, but how it's kind of just a symptom of how we shouldn't be designing cards, and just how I win on itself that it is. And if you want to see more conversations like this, then leave a like on the video, but especially if you're a Food Chain hater, then you got to leave a like on the video here. Now, I will completely admit that as a Commander player myself, I do have a Food Chain deck, and that is the Mothman deck. And with that in mind, being in the colors that do enable something like this pretty well, I do try and stay within the safe realms of it. I try not to go with the infinite mana combos that dump everything into an X spell. I try and just recast my Commander a bunch of times, just keeping it fair, which is nice within the confines of EDH itself. But I think Food Chain really got its start so long after its printing back in Mercadian Mass. I mean, the card itself, you've seen it on the screen, but we can read it here. Green and 2 for an enchantment that says exile a creature you control. Add X mana of one color, where X is 1 plus the exiled creature's mana value. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells. And so the big difference with this is that when Mercadian Mass was around, Magic's whole identity around exile was essentially removing it from the game. That's what Swords to Plowshares did. That's what Path to Exile did. That's what exiling was. It was a zone that was ultimately just gone. But then that changed over time. We had effects that would bring back cards from exile that we could interact with from exile. And with the kind of coming of the EDH format, we had the exile zone being even more interactable, where if a commander was to be put into exile, then instead it could be put back into the command zone. So we already see this kind of shifting with our 100 card singleton format. And now with something like Food Chain, though, it took a while for an enabler to come out. You can't just have like 5 card combos where you exile a creature and then pull a creature out of exile, but then copy the spell that does that or put it back in your hand. Like you see how it gets too complicated. Food Chain nowadays is you cast Food Chain, you cast 1 spell, and you get infinite mana. And then with infinite mana, if you can't figure it out, I don't know what to tell you, right? Like you can hopefully sack your commander to this and just cast it a bunch of times. Hopefully it's got an ETB or something valuable, but that's really the base level of Food Chain. And the enabler came so long after. The first enabler was Mist Hollow Griffin. Blue and 2 for a creature griffin with flying. You may cast Mist Hollow Griffin from exile as a 3/3. And so the big thing was with this was that now when you're able to exile Mist Hollow Griffin, you gain 1 plus its mana, and then you're able to bring it back, right? And so you're able to do this over and over and over again, and you're able to create mana of any one color. If you're remembering Food Chain, it doesn't lock you into the colors of the creature that you're exiling. You just have to create mana of one color when you exile it. So you can exile it 5 times, get 5 mana of each one of the 5 colors, and just keep going over and over and over again. And then at that point, you're doing, like, the world's your oyster, right? The world's your oyster as to how you're kind of casting Mist Hollow Griffin, because what's nice about it is that, again, you might be further confused by the fact that it costs blue, but then what you do is you just create a bunch of blue mana, and then what you do is when you cast it again, you create a bunch of green mana, and you use the blue mana to pay for kind of its blue cost and the remaining mana to pay for its 2 costs, right? So again, that was the first real enabler for it, and that's where we started to see things come around for a card like this. Prices spiking and its playability just immediately skyrocketing in my opinion, for the EDH form. And it would take a while for a cEDH to really get a hold of something like this. The format, in my opinion, at that time was still definitely in its infancy of popularity, but then along came cards like Eternal Scourge, which was now colorless. You can cast Eternal Scourge from exile, and heck, if it was targeted, it would be put into exile as well. So this was a lot easier. Now, Eternal Scourge didn't require you any mana restrictions to cast this. You could just be in a mono green deck and cast Eternal Scourge and go off with Food Chain, whereas Eternal Scourge would require you to be in a blue-green EDH deck. And then now we obviously have Squee as well. Squee being red, you may cast it from exile. So now you have a red, colorless, blue, and green option, right? So you have a teamer. Teamer is the ideal color for Food Chain, but really all it is blue red, or green red, or green blue. those are your ideal colors for it. And so with that, you can see how easy it is to enable. You just get food chain out. There's a lot of enchantment tutors out there in the format, and then you get a creature like this out and you're off to the races. You're creating infinite mana and then you're getting out an X spell. In many ways, it can be seen as simple as a 2-card combo like Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation, or Thassa's Oracle and X. Think of Thassa's Oracle and food chain being in that same slot. You just need an enabler for it, and then you cast it and you win the game. And I think that's a lot of frustrations that people have. I will say that Thassa's Oracle is a step easier because it literally says you win the game. But if you have infinite mana and nothing to do with it, I kind of just blame you in EDH, because at a default as a food chain commander, you want to make sure that your commander, at least if you have no other enabler, can actually go off with food chain, that it has a haste enabler, that it has a way to tutor up different things, or it does something on ETB that maybe does damage or whatever. Like, that's what you want from a food chain commander. So at a base level, when you're creating infinite mana, you pretty much just win the game. You just have to go through one extra step. And I think that's my primary frustration with food chain. That yes, there are certain colors that can't really take advantage of it. Like, you can't go like green white and you really only have Eternal Scourge. You will have a bunch of creature tutors that green does have access to, but it's not optimal. But I think that's really what it is, right? It's not optimal, but you can just play green and you get access to food chain. And I think that's where my problem is with Eternal Scourge, because Eternal Scourge could have very easily not have ever been printed, although I will say they probably weren't thinking about its specific interaction with food chain, in all fairness. But if Eternal Scourge wasn't around, I think food chain would be a lot easier to deal with. Right now, as long as you're playing green and a commander has an ETB effect that's honestly half valuable, you probably just have a food chain commander. I mean, the most ideal food chain commander out there is Prosh. Right, Prosh being 3 black, green, and red, so a Jund commander with a legendary creature dragon with flying 5/5. Whenever you cast Prosh, Sky Raider of Care, create X01 red Cobalt creature tokens named Kobolds of Care keep, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast Prosh. Sacrifice another creature and Prosh gets +1/+0. Now the thing with Prosh is that yes, you can cast this a bunch of times, sacrifice it to food chain, create a bunch of Kobolds, and the thing is with Prosh is that it doesn't have any haste, right? So you're creating a bunch of creatures. Do you have something to take advantage of those ETBs with something like a Perforos out? Do you have a haste enabler in red? Maybe a Concordant Crossroads out of green? You're playing black and Prosh, so you probably have a bunch of tutors. This is kind of the default commander out there that exists for food chain. It's the one that a lot of people think about, and it's that kind of stalwart piece of it has an ETB, it has a way to take advantage of the creatures that it creates, but it doesn't really have an enabler to swing at you. So you do need another piece out there. Something taking advantage of the ETB, something in Prosh could just be something dying, because then you can sacrifice all the Kobolds, and then you're kind of off to the races from there. And that's really how easy the food chain mechanic is, or the food chain archetype is in Commander. And I think ultimately here's my thing with it. It's too easy to enable if you're playing green. And that is specifically because of the Eternal Scourge. But because of the wide variety of what EDH has, it's not necessarily a staple, because a lot of commanders aren't, even if they're green, aren't built around the whole food chain idea. They don't take advantage of food chain all too well. And I think that's really what keeps food chain down. I think that when food chain is enabled by its commander, it becomes a problem. But if the commander doesn't necessarily take advantage of an ETB or have some type of busted like on cast trigger, then food chain doesn't really matter, because that's what you need at a default. So if you have no cards in hand, but then you have your food chain and you have its enabler, can you use your commander to go off? That is the default question that you're asking. And then you probably play a bunch of tutors. Hopefully you're playing like 4 or 5 colors. You play a bunch of tutors, you play your food chain, and then you go off. That's pretty much the cEDH deck, or the high power EDH deck that you're looking for. And I think it's balanced because of the fact that most commanders aren't built around it. But I think the fact that Eternal Scourge is around is what keeps this enchantment problematic for me. Now, I don't, again, think this needs to be banned at all. I just want to highlight how easy it is to enable. And as we further delve into zones and making the commander format more accessible, I think we ultimately will start tripping the boundaries of what it means to be in exile. Casting from exile will make it a more interactable zone, and food chain ultimately stands as an enchantment that will look to benefit off of that. As we have more powerful ETBs, more legendaries around, we will have more powerful food chain combos, and it's just something that I want to be aware of, something that I just wanted to push out there and get everyone's thoughts on. What do you think about food chain? What are your thoughts on one of the most popular combo pieces that exist in the EDH format? I personally, as a combo player myself, I do like it, I am aware of it, but I also try and honestly power it down because of the pods that I'm in. I don't really just want to be going off kind of infinite mana all the time. I do want to make it a little bit fun, and if I do go off with food chain, I want the ultimate payoff to be a little bit, you know, like let my opponents work around it a bit more, because honestly, at the end of the day, it's way too easy to break food chain.